Perfect. Looks like we have kicked off to today. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar around how Darktrace can protect Microsoft environments, specifically around email, of course. So before we get started, just a quick little bit of housekeeping for the day. You are put on mute, but you can absolutely submit questions at any time. Please do, feel free to interact on this session today. We'll also be throwing out a couple of polls during the session just to keep that interactivity up, and of course, get your thoughts on certain topics. If you forget to ask a question at any time, particularly after the webinar, of course, then please do feel free to email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, where we can respond to you there. There is a QA session at the end for all of the submitted questions. We will try and answer some of the questions as we go, as long as they're relevant to the topic, but just to maintain flow, we've of course put a Q&A session at the end. This seminar is recorded today, will be made available to you later this week. So if you do have to drop out or if you've missed anything, you can of course catch up that way. There is also a poll / survey at the end where you can request a callback from one of the specialists at Bytes, so we can have a bit more of a one-to-one session on the topics discussed today. So in terms of who's speaking to you right now, my name is Janai Miacho. I'm the Head of Technology Solutions Development at Bytes. I tend to say that it's a fancy role that means wearing many hats across the business. So work quite a bit with cybersecurity pre-sales, but also around the delivery services and our cyber consulting department, and tend to get quite involved with a number of different vendors and solutions. One of which, or two of which, sorry, is of course Microsoft and Darktrace. So today I'm joined by Mariana from Darktrace, who is the Director of Email Security. I'm not going to take any of her thunder in terms of her introduction. I know that she'll introduce herself later when she goes through her content. But great to have you on board today, Mariana. Really looking forward to some of the topics that you're bringing to this session. So by way of a very quick agenda, done the introductions, so we can absolutely tick that one off. I'm going to talk a little bit around some of the Microsoft native capabilities when it comes to email security. And then I'm going to hand over to Mariana to talk around the Darktrace email security and how this complements in to the Microsoft stack. We'll also be looking at how AI can be used to protect emails, and then we'll look at hosting a bit of a session for Q&A towards the end, and then closing down the session from there. So quite an easy but equally interesting agenda for today. So in terms of the Microsoft native email protection and the native Microsoft email capabilities, when we look at where Microsoft was and has become, it's there's been giant leaps made. Inherently, Microsoft wasn't always well known for email security, even though we got things like Exchange Online protection. It always only ever gave us a basic degree of email security. But as we know, Microsoft of course understood this, recognized this. They decided to invest a lot of time, effort, and money into the development of security solutions, and email was of course one of them. So they have increased their capabilities around prevention, detection. There's now features that allows the investigation and hunting of certain threats within email, and in addition to that, we've also got the actual response capabilities. So when something happens, we can actually go in and do something about it. And for those of you that are fairly up to date with Microsoft, you've probably seen that there's been even more additions around the awareness and training. So while there was always the attack simulation, they've also now complemented this with the awareness and training. So Microsoft inherently has become very comprehensive when we look at their email security. However, with Microsoft, as you know, there are a multitude of different email plans, which are specific to the email security, of course. And I think a lot of us here will probably recognize Exchange Online protection. So Exchange Online protection is pretty much the basic level of protection that you get with an Office 365 license. It's included within Exchange Online pretty sure it's plan 1, definitely not plan 2. So it's pretty much your bog standard protection. Now, whilst I say basic, it's not necessarily useless. Exchange Online Protection, of course, does help us prevent quite broad attacks, quite common attacks that we tend to see, and these are normally known attack vectors that we tend to see out there in the wild. The main thing with Exchange Online Protection is it filters out a lot of volume. It filters out a lot of stuff that's pretty easy to identify. So it's quite good for the mailbox hygiene. But of course, when we look at some more of the sophisticated attacks, it's a little less effective. And of course, Microsoft understood this, and this is exactly why they brought in the Defender for Office 365 plans, formerly known as Office 365 ATP. And there are two versions of this plan, a P1 and a P2. Now, P1 looks to add more preventative and detection means on the email security side. So this adds in things like safe URLs or safe links and safe attachments. So this is basically your URL rewriting when it comes through on an email, as well as attachment sandboxing. So actually taking that attachment out of an email, putting it in a sandbox, poking it around a little bit, seeing if it does anything dodgy or malicious, and making a decision based on that. Additionally, what P1 also provides is additional protection to the different services and apps within Microsoft. So it doesn't just apply to email, it can also apply to things like SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. So it looks to take that protection and make it a little bit broader, but still around the detection piece. Then we look at P2. P2 then builds on top of this by providing us with investigation capabilities. So once we start seeing email threats come into our environment, we can actually go in, investigate these, see if they are part of a campaign, see what types of threats they are, and see if there's any correlation between those threats. It also gives us the response capability, so it gives us the means to actually block that email across our whole estate, or remove that email from a user's mailbox. And there's an element of automation that can go around this. Additionally, we get things like the attack simulator, so we can actually simulate, a phishing email to our users to see, is there a group of users that are more at risk of clicking, a malicious link. Additionally, there's also awareness training that can be bolted on of the side of that. So hopefully that gives a good overview of the email plans that Microsoft have to offer, as well as the capabilities of email security within Microsoft. And I suppose, just to finish off in terms of, the expected functionality that we tend to see, when we look at the different services, it all started with Exchange Online Protection, and Microsoft have continuously built on that with the Defender for Office 365 plans. And when we look at where the actual emphasis is on the protective means, EOP was primarily around protection. It filters out, some of the bog standard stuff, which is great. Of course, Defender for P1 extends that quite a bit, but it extends that detection and that detection capability, whilst P2 then starts to give us the investigate and response capability for when something happens. Now, the big however, and the one part that I want to pick out here is the detection capability. There is no email security solution out there. In fact, there is no security solution out there that's ever going to be 100% effective. And, the Microsoft email stack, it's no different to that. It's very good. Microsoft are, of course, throwing a lot of investment, a lot of funding into it. They've extended the security capabilities as we've of course seen, but nothing's going to be 100% effective. And because of that, this is why we tend to see, email security solutions that complement the Microsoft stack. Of course, Darktrace being, the key one, and of course the key topic for today in terms of complementing the Microsoft stack and extending that protection as much as possible. So we are detecting as much as possible, and we do have the capabilities to investigate that as much as possible. Anyway, I do not want to step on Mariana's toes. I definitely do not want to steal her thunder. I am going to hand over to Mariana right now to talk around that Darktrace and Microsoft integration piece. So Mariana, I think I've just seen you pop up on the webcam, and we just need to hand over the presenter mode. There we go, and it's over to you.
Cheers, thanks, Gennaro. I love how you were talking about the sandbox there as you're poking these various attachments and the emails coming in. I think I'm going to steal that analogy now in the future. But yes, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you all to the participants who have joined us today. We are going to have quite a little bit of a roller coaster ride, as before I can talk about how Darktrace protects Microsoft environments, which I know is what you're all here for. I do want to sort of detour ever so slightly to have a little bit of a conversation about artificial intelligence, because that's really at the heart of what this conversation is about, and at the heart of Darktrace's product offering. So I won't go into too much of a Darktrace pitch. As Gennaro mentioned, I'm Director of Email Security Products here at Darktrace, which I think is the best job, because essentially it allows me to interface out with prospects and customers and see the weird and wonderful things that are happening in the world of the inboxes, and of course all of the different attacks that are coming in, but also work very closely with our development team and see what's coming down in terms of new capabilities and new applications of our AI. So first off, let's talk about artificial intelligence, and please feel free to, as Gennaro said, ask questions along the way. So I'm going to break up this segment of the content into 3 sections, and I'll sort of pop in and ask Gennaro if anything has come in through the Q&A box. So please keep them coming. So first off, let's talk a little bit about offensive AI. Now, I know I haven't actually discussed artificial intelligence yet, so why the hell am I talking about offensive artificial intelligence? Well, because I think that it's very important that we realize that offensive artificial intelligence is nothing more than simply the other side arming up with the latest and greatest technologies and trends in a way. And of course, they are also using automation, augmentation, and AI-powered technologies to be able to be more devastating in their attacks. We have seen deep fakes blur the line between what is real and what isn't real. And to a large degree, it doesn't really matter in the digital world if it is a true reflection of the in real life, as long as the person receiving that medium believes it. What we've seen, of course, is an increase in the automation of emails. I don't need to go into very much detail as to how much, spam attacks have increased, or phishing attacks on a wide scale, not particularly sophisticated in that they are, technically speaking, quite easy to pull off. You set up a new domain, you pretend to be a well-known bank or a well-known entity, maybe you send a fake receipt saying, hey, did you buy this thing on Cyber Monday's deal? And of course you hadn't, so you very quickly go to declare that as fraudulent and accidentally patch yourself into a fake landing page and give your credentials to the attackers. We're actually going to see one of these play out in the email world in a moment. But what is AI on the offensive side? It very much is the technology and the capability to mimic that human expression and that human thought process, if you will, on the offensive side, whereby then a campaign or a piece of malware can be launched and it can be left on its own without further intervention from the attacker. Obviously, that's fantastic for the attacker because it greatly reduces the amount of work that they need to put in. And we have seen this. This is not stuff that is out there in the future. This is stuff that is happening now. So when we're talking about defensive capabilities, and when we talk about AI for the defense, first off, everyone out there and their dogs say that they do artificial intelligence. So what's the difference? Well, I had to explain it to my nieces and nephews recently. And this is a common problem that I'm sure many of you will find that you can relate, of trying to teach children how to tidy up and clean up their room. And of course, who doesn't love Rosie from the Jetsons, right? That robot that does everything for our house. So I was thinking, okay, so how would we teach a robot to tidy up the room? There are a couple of ways of going about this. This is essentially machine learning, right? We are teaching the computer something and the computer has to learn it. In this case, how to put things away. Now, we could teach it an organization system. This toy goes into this place. And that's pretty straightforward. And it's what most machine learning techniques use. It's a labeling, it's a training data set of a matching of a one-to-one relationship an if this, then that kind of relationship. It works well in the binary world of machines. It doesn't, however, work well as children grow up and the toys change. Because what happens is that then those toys are going to change, the place where they go changes, and that new puzzle box might not fit the Lego box that you had designated or that space that you had designated. So rather than teaching them how to put things away and classify and teach the computer the labeling system, what we do is we abstract and we teach it the pattern of life. This is what we want the room to look like. It needs to be tidy, and we don't really care what each toy is or specifically where it goes, but this is the normal state of affairs that we want it to learn and to get to. And this is the normal state of affairs that we then want the AI or the machine to guarantee or to make sure we're always coming back to. How much we then push the analogy of a computer mimicking the human is very much, I think, up to the academics. And when we're talking about then the defensive side versus the offensive side, what we're having is this AI in two sides. That's essentially what also those GANs, the generative adversarial networks. So you have an AI versus AI, and these are going to do battle with each other. In a simulated lab environment, we've taught an AI how to do artwork, the essence of the great masters. And then the other AI was taught to tell the difference. So we've already seen these battles of the AI in laboratory environments where I think the output is fantastic. I would consider this a beautiful piece of artwork, worthy of hanging in any museum. Definitely, I would appreciate it in my living room. Whether or not it's true art, again, I'll leave that up to the academics. The point is that AI is already at a stage where it's generating new ideas, new evolutions based on previous attacks and previous bouts. Especially when it's doing these previous bouts with another AI, it does it much, much faster. This particular AI painting was generated in 2 weeks, definitely faster than what I'd be able to learn from scratch if I had to do some kind of artwork or oil painting or something like that. So faster, lower investment, higher return on investment for the attacker, more profitability. So when we are now thinking, okay, well, how do we apply this into the world of cybersecurity? There are, again, many different ways in which we can apply artificial intelligence to learn from the world or the environments that we present. The vast majority of cybersecurity technologies out there that will do AI will actually look at the fingerprints of an attack. These are retrospective looking. These are going to be very limited in only being able to detect that which it's seen before. And this kind of fingerprinting or heuristics approach is doomed to be limited because attackers are always innovating. They're always coming up with new attacks, new infrastructure. And that novelty basically creates a game of cat and mouse, right? Or of whack-a-mole, which I'm going to show you later. Sort of, we keep seeing these and we keep having to squash these different attacks and these different variations or variants, excuse the pun. And we're constantly catching up. So it's not a sustainable way for us to be thinking about cybersecurity in the long term. And I mentioned that the GANs and those things, the AI-powered attack, well, working in email security as I do, of course, the vast majority of attacks ultimately actually come back into the inbox. And so for me, the question of where do you start on that journey is absolutely in the inbox. Where do you as a company or you as users, where should you think about starting that journey of using artificial intelligence? I would say it is in the inbox, also because it's also the attacker side. In a Black Hat conference of July, I think it's the United States one, researchers presented findings showing that when put against humans versus the machines, human or machine powered phish emails, actually the emails that were generated by the machine had a higher rate of interaction with the human recipients than emails generated by the humans. And that should scare us, because we've already seen the onslaught of automation and how that quickly increases the rate and the incidence rate of attacks going through. Now we're basically closing that loop, right? Because if we think of it as a spectrum, on one hand, we had those sort of spray and pray, not sophisticated. On the others, we had the deeply personalized, researched customized, targeted emails. With AI, that spectrum now closes into a loop. So it's very, very difficult for us as humans to be able to tell the difference. I think it's implausible to train our way out of this. We are flawed individuals. And on the offensive side, they're arming up. It's not a fair fight to leave our humans without the AI capability. So where does this leave us? It's not a fair fight, absolutely. AI is available to both sides, and you can bet your socks that the attackers are using it. So this is now the time for our first poll. And I want to ask all of you whether or not you and your businesses are using artificial intelligence. Doesn't need to be in cybersecurity, maybe it's somewhere else. Now, we couldn't fit the last question, what is AI? Hopefully by now you've been able to respond that. But I'd like to just get a gauge of how much of your business is using artificial intelligence. So is all of the business units, is it most of them, about half, a little bit, maybe 20%, or no, we don't know what to do with it. Please vote, and we will give it a few more seconds to then close this poll. And can we see the results? Stroke of magic. Here we go. Interesting. So 70% of you, about 20% of the business is using artificial intelligence in some capacity. Let me just do a quick math and see if that's 100% of respondents. Yeah, close enough. A couple of you didn't answer, so I'm going to assume that those of you who didn't answer are the what's the AI category. And hopefully you'll digest the rest of everything I've gone through without having too many nightmares. But I think this is very, very interesting because it does confirm that you're all somewhere along, or most of you are somewhere along the journey of adapting artificial intelligence for some kind of business application. Gennaro, do we have any questions that have come in? I'd like to take a moment here and see if anything has come through the chat box or the Q&A box.
Haven't seen anything popped in just yet. Just a reminder to to everyone, if you do have any questions, do feel free to pop them in, and we can answer them as we go. But for now, no questions have come in, Mariana. I'm guessing everyone understands at the moment exactly what AI is.
Great. So, well, it does seem slightly unfair because I'm asking you guys for questions, so please feel free to reciprocate. Let's then talk specifically about cybersecurity. As mentioned, the fingerprints of past attacks, that's generally how cybersecurity has come up over the last, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years, which is pretty much in the same way that we had done physical security. The idea had been, if we can stop the bad thing from coming into our ecosystem, then only good stuff can come in and we're safe. Of course, that doesn't keep up. To push the analogy into the medieval castles, once upon a time we had one access point, that was the main gate, with a nice perimeter wall around the city. That meant that your traffic was throttled at that gate. There was only a limited amount of things that could come in and out of your business or your ecosystem. And of course, we also know that walls just generally, apart from not being very good defensive technologies, are also very restrictive, and the city or the business cannot grow past them. So many different ways in which the analogy extends also to the business world and to the digital space, especially as we think about the fact that we have transcended those walls as we use third-party cloud applications, especially in the Microsoft environment. All of these collaboration tools, it's a shame we're not on Teams today, but we won't tell them that. But all of the different collaboration tools, the hosting, cloud hosting, is it my infrastructure, is it Microsoft's? It doesn't really matter. The point is that an AI can learn that environment, that richness of all of the interactions, of all of the spaces that we're interacting with. And rather than rely on knowledge of the attacks, we're going to learn about the self, about the business. And by changing this equation, by having the AI learn about the business and not the threats, what we are creating is an AI that is actually able to keep up with change, that is able to evolve as the business evolves. And this is hugely important because it means that it does not require training data sets in the lab that then are outgrown. As you're outgrowing that training data set, you'd have to constantly reteach the AI. Well, that doesn't happen with a self-learning AI. The AI will continue to learn, even when faced with new environments, new threats, new challenges. That actually reminds me of a story. One of our analysts was investigating a really weird situation in one of our customers. They sent out a notification. We called up the customer saying, hey, there's something weird going on. You might want to have a look at this. And 2 or 3 days later, it turned out that that was an APT41 attack. The AI was able to identify that this wasn't part of the self of the normal pattern of life of that business, even though it had no idea what it was. It was just some other. Apart from the capability of calling up the customer and saying, hey, you might want to have a look at that, from the moment that the AI is capable of understanding what's unusual, we can now also have it respond. Now, I use the word autonomous here quite liberally. It's not automatic. Automatic is an if-then situation, SOAR, it's a policy, and those are very good too. But they won't keep up to new things, because if you haven't written a rule for it, then the AI wouldn't respond. With self-learning technologies, instead, the AI is able to respond as long as you give it the permission to. And what it does, it acknowledges the fact that there is a degree of threat, and it will respond accordingly to that degree of threat to minimize the impact of the interruption or of the response, so that it doesn't stop the business from functioning, but it stops the threat from escalating. This is really amazing. This is the whole product category that we call Antigena. You might have heard Antigena email or Antigena SaaS. At the end of the day, these are licensing questions as to how or where we're deploying this capability. But this capability is unique to Darktrace. This autonomous response is really where I think that complementarity for the Microsoft environments that are very rich in the ability to create profiles on policies and segment the network or the business. This is how then you're using the best in breed of both of the offerings of us and of course of Microsoft. So we are, how are we doing for time? Okay, we're about halfway through, and it's time for another poll, as we're going to be now switching gears a little bit and talking specifically about email security. So before I go into this, a common way of addressing or educating your workforce is by running phishing simulations. So I'm wondering, how many of you have already run a phishing simulation in your organization? Just yes if you've already run one, no if you haven't. This is a binary question, so let's try to get 100% of the results on this one, please. Have you run phishing simulations in your organization? Let's see the results. Most of you have. 56, oh, we have 100% participation. Thank you so much. 56% of you have, 44 no. Interesting, it's a bit, can I round this to about 50-50? Definitely email security or AI for email security is what I focus on every single day, and I think it's singularly the best place to start the journey, because everyone is vaguely aware of the fact that there are a lot of different ways in which attackers are getting into our inboxes. And I'm not just talking about nobility from faraway lands or lawyers that represent a long lost deceased relative that's left us a fortune. I'm also talking about those more subtle threats that aren't immediately obvious. Personally, I'm not a fan of email phishing simulations. I think that it distracts a lot from the business, and I also think that for the people who end up clicking, it's it's very tricky to then say, aha, you did something you shouldn't have. And yes, this is a learning moment, but it's also kind of a, oh, for God's sakes, like I'm already so busy, do you really have to make my day that much worse by making me realize that I'm not good at this? Humans are flawed, as I said, and I personally don't put much stock in our capability or any organic matter's capability to be out there looking out for the attacker all the time. Even in a community, even if we are all looking out for that fish, somebody will inevitably click on the thing that they might not, in retrospect, they wouldn't have clicked on it. But here's the thing. It's becoming increasingly difficult to know when the email is legitimate and not. But we're not even going to talk about spoofing. I don't even want to go into new domains that are registered, et cetera, et cetera. What I want to talk about here is supply chain attacks, because that is technically impossible to distinguish. What am I talking about supply chain attacks? I'm talking about a known entity a supplier, but this could also be a partner or a customer. Somebody who you have legitimate correspondence with, who is a known and trusted sender. This is exactly what happened here. On the left-hand side, Eleonora did what she could when she realized that her email had been compromised. She took to Twitter, she took to the various social medias and tried to warn her colleagues, her business partners, to say, if you're getting an invoice from me, don't click on it. This is not from me. I've been hacked. I cannot apologize enough for this. I feel for Eleonora because, it's not just about the inconvenience of having been associated to an attack. This is horrible. Her identity has now been usurped. The trust that people have, sort of the brand of her name, has now been violated. And so it's just a really unfortunate situation to find yourself in. Now, when these attacks come through, and they are on the rise, exactly because technically speaking, there's no rule that you could write ahead of time that would predict the way in which Eleonora would have been unusual. But Darktrace's AI was not fooled. On the right-hand side, you see Cash's response on Twitter saying, we're doing a proof of value with Darktrace. The AI, after 2 weeks of learning, had already identified that this was unusual for you and blocked the email altogether. An email block is a pretty certain response. It's not one that we do very often. The AI will try to neutralize the email in other ways, but it might have escalated that threat level to say, no, actually, this is warrants of a block. And thank goodness, too, because looking at Eleonora's outbox and on the bottom screenshot on the left, it does look like the attackers were pretty, I don't know, I'm missing the word here, but they sent out a lot of emails, is my point. What does this look like on the artificial intelligence side? Unfortunately, this is actually a story that happens so often. This same pattern of events, the supplier whose email is compromised, trust is used to then get into other businesses. Well, let's have a look at a different situation, this time in a beverage company. Actually, my colleague Dan Fine, also director of product here at Darktrace, wrote up this find. This is Alessandro. He is one of the suppliers at the drinks manufacturer company. We have an established communication history between him and the customer environment, and the AI sees absolutely nothing wrong with this particular email, dated the 11th of March, 2021 at about 18:50, 100 hours. You can't really see this very well, I don't think, but a few hours later, or the next day, Alessandro's email had been compromised, and the attackers used his address to send out a large volume of emails to many different recipients at the company. From 0 to 100, the AI was absolutely certain that this was not the real Alessandro. Let's have a look on the left-hand side. This is the tags. I mean, you could also read the narrative here. This is automatically generated by the AI that explains to you in very plain English why it is that it's taking the decision to hold it back altogether. But essentially, I'll just go through the summary view here. This was extraordinarily out of character. There was a suspicious link contained within the email. This is an established domain, so the AI has context. The known correspondence, again, the AI building on that contextual awareness and that understanding of the history, the known domain relationship, the moderate communication history, all of that. Below here, hold message, lock all links, and move to junk. All of these things happen very quickly as the AI had decided, actually, move to junk, lock the links. This is actually part of a bigger campaign, and we didn't only see it in Alessandro's. We didn't only see it in this recipient's, Rupert, but Alessandro, the sender, had actually sent also emails to Rupert, to Elizabeth, to James Rohan, to multiple different people at this organization. So this is a widespread attack that the AI very, very comfortably held back and realized that these were part of the same attack campaign, even though they were from a trusted sender. And this is why I do not like whitelisting and blacklisting. We need to move away from that sort of binary approach and understand that communications, the interactions between humans are much more complex than a simple yes or no that a computer could deal with. When Alessandro realized, much like Eleonora had, that his email had been compromised, he wrote in, and this is the top email here, you can see also by the timestamps, 1600 versus 1200. Alessandro tried to send in an alert to say, hey, I've been compromised, please watch out, that there were a whole bunch of phishing emails sent. Of course, here the AI understood that even though it was the same sending domain, same sender, this was not a threatening communication and was allowed to go through. How is this deployed? How does this complement your Microsoft environment? Quite simply, through journaling. we would set up, I should take out G Suite from this slide. My apologies, Microsoft. But we will set up a journaling rule in your Microsoft environment, whether that is online or on premises. Once this email hits your Microsoft email server, a journaled copy is sent over to Antigena email. So we are doing a parallel processing. Not being in line also means that there will be no interruptions, no impact on the mail delivery. This is analyzed in near real time, and if Antigena needs to take some response, it will send that response through an API back to the server, and usually it will influence the email even before it hits the client's inbox. If you do have any gateways, that's no problem. Darktrace Antigena email is always the last thing to look, so we can work behind one gateway, behind two gateways. I think there's somebody who has 3 gateways plus Microsoft. So they did a very, very big investment. And even there, even in those cases, because gateways are only able to understand email campaigns en masse, and they're not fine-tuned, they don't understand the subtleties of your business uniquely. That's why Antigena is such a strong complement to the Microsoft offering, to the native security offerings, because it's able to complement it with a different philosophy. Microsoft looks across the entire spectrum. We're looking at understanding just your environment. And of course, we've spoken about email, but email is really a cloud application. It's the SaaS application to some capacity. But it's impossible to think about any company nowadays that is not somehow using a cloud or a collaboration platform of some kind. A survey by CIO magazine also showed that 96% of organizations are using cloud in some capacity. So I'm guessing in a poll they would go, what is cloud? At the question, that would be about 4%, and that's probably also not somebody who would be on this event. So I'm going to pause here. We've talked about email, and now I want to talk about a different use case of a Microsoft account that was compromised in more ways than just email. But before I go into that, I want to give a little pause here to ask if there are any questions. Gennaro, have we seen anything come in?
Nothing's come in as of yet, but I suppose this is a good prompter for everyone to input your questions now, before we proceed.
Thank you. And this is the last segment also. I promised 3 segments, and this will be the last one. Because I did say email is one application, but of course Microsoft has much more than just email offering, right? And this next story is a story which, again, there is a blog entry on the Darktrace website. But with essentially the rise of remote working, the cloud or SaaS usage, I'll stop saying cloud because this really is software as a service, especially in the Microsoft 365 environment. Of course, the usage of those cloud-based applications has exploded just about everywhere because it allows for that flexibility. Now, in this story, I like to akin it to a massive game of whack-a-mole. I put here the photo of the game, right, in which the moles will come up and with a big hammer, well, kids in this photo again, but I love this game, right? You're just whacking them down as they keep popping up. And to some extent, it's a really good analogy for what's happened, because what we're going to see here is an attacker that managed to actually compromise multiple accounts, and they work through those accounts to use them at their advantage. And every time that the security team finds out about one account being compromised, they shut it down. The attacker moves, they shut it down. But without giving away the end of the story, let's have a quick look. So this is an organization that has about 5,000 devices in the environment, about 1,000 SaaS accounts or user accounts that are dedicated to cloud environments. And we're going to see this on a timeline. So what happens is at the bottom of the timeline, we have the account A that was compromised. How it was compromised, we actually don't know. Might have been a phishing email. Maybe they bought the password off of some data leak or off the dark web, or maybe they just were given the password. We don't really know. So here the attacker comes into account A. The attacker was observed previewing files that were likely to contain some kind of customer information, but there were no other follow-up activities. But then the attacker moved over to account B, and they set a new inbox rule 3 hours after that account A initial compromise. And that resulted in a high severity alert. And around this time, the attacker had also sent out a number of phishing emails from account B, emails that probably leveraged trust like we've seen in the supply chain attack, like we saw with the Eleonora email, a whole bunch of emails that seemed harmless and included a link to a folder for OneDrive. Of course, the link itself was fake. It looked like it was going to OneDrive, but it didn't actually go to OneDrive. It probably led to a fake Microsoft login page, which would have then prompted the recipients to put in their username, their passwords, and so gain access to even more accounts. This phishing attempt was also detected by our AI. It wasn't allowed to intervene. This was during the proof of value and before the humans had allowed the AI the capability to step in and to do that autonomous response. So what we had to do is alert the humans. The humans were then called on to shut down account B. That basically took care of things because by changing the password, the attacker was locked out of account B. And after that they had been locked out, they tried and failed many times to get into that. And we saw that attempt at the login, failed logins. But the attackers didn't waste any time. They simply went on to account C the very next day. And we saw the same sort of autonomous systems number. It is likely that this account had been infected by that OneDrive phishing email. So essentially that spread of the emails out from account B tricked somebody, account C owner, into believing it. So account C was then used by the attacker to preview files, again, likely containing more contact information. Again, this was alerted, the security team admin changed the passwords, the attacker was locked out. And when we then saw the failed login account C. I think you know where I'm going to go next, because of course, account D and E were then the next accounts that were used by the attackers. They hijacked in the previous phishing attacks. Same thing happened here. The AI alerted it, but the AI couldn't intervene autonomously, so the humans had to lock them out. This is the massive game of whack-a-mole that I was talking about, because essentially every time an attacker got into a new account, the administrators then locked them out, but then had to contact the users and say, hey, please change your password. And remember account A? Yeah, so did the attacker. So after they failed to go through account B, C, D, and E, they went back to account A. So the unusual login, you can see it here on the timeline in this space here. Attackers went back to account A. We notified the security team about account A being compromised. They locked it out of account A and also decided, hang on a second, let's just let the AI take care of things. This is the change. It's not just about security for email. It's not just about OneDrive. It's that whole ecosystem that we are relying on with Microsoft. And yes, there are policies and there are rules that we can be setting up, but like children with rules, every time you come up with a rule, somehow they find an exception, a way to bypass that rule. And that's exactly what the attackers are doing. So by bringing Darktrace's AI, what we're doing is we're complementing that rules and policies in Microsoft by giving the security teams 100% visibility across all of the applications. And that is exactly why companies such as Renewable Power have chosen to have this partnership. Or in the words of Jack Johnson, it's always better when we're together. Obviously, I'm not going to have much of a career on The Voice, but better together. That is the message. When you're using both Darktrace and Microsoft, you have an unmatched capability in your cybersecurity team because you have all of those preventative tools, but you've also got the AI, which is absolutely bespoke and trained in your environment, in your business. It doesn't matter what that business is, what it looks like, what industry you're in, or how architecturally you're deployed. We get to the data, we understand the data, and we're then able to complement that cloud offering. In detail, how does it look? Okay, so if we're going to try to spread out the different Microsoft offerings, if it's email, yes, we have that integration via journaling and API for either online Exchange or Exchange on-premise. Any SaaS offering, any Microsoft 365 applications, OneDrive, Notes, whatever it is, PowerPoints, Excel spreadsheets, they contain a wealth of information and insights about your business. And these are commonly left in Microsoft environments where then you're depending on the user, not fall for the phish email and not reutilize the same password. The huge amounts of trust that we're putting in our users. I would say trust but verify. So let's use the AI to understand when those systems are being used without the user's knowledge, and especially when then an attacker is pretending to be one of our legitimate users. And of course, cloud. I didn't get into this very much, but for companies that are running on Azure or have cloud technologies that are dependent on Microsoft environments, same thing here. We can capture the traffic data via the Azure VTAP. We have integrations across Sentinel, Defender. There's a whole host of ways in which Darktrace can get to that data, understand the data, no matter where it is. Let's think about this a second from the workforce point of view. Essentially, you have a distributed workforce across many different types of device. God forbid you have BYO devices, which is very, very common in too many industries. So again, Darktrace here, no matter where they are, if they're working from coffee shops, from home, from their office, from a train, that is part of your digital infrastructure, your digital environment. And that digital environment is that complex multitude of all of the products and servers and services that you have chosen to make available to your users. So we can draw pretty pictures, we can architect it, but at the core, again, what is this all about? It's about that partnership of technologies that are best in breed. And since May of this year, Microsoft announced Darktrace partnership to bring our AI to their product offering. And then more recently, Darktrace was selected to join the member of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Association, which we're hugely proud of, just a testament of that continued investment in the partnership and in working together. Again, I wish I had Jack Johnson here on cue on Spotify to play it in the background. With that, I wanted to thank you. That's the end of the presentation. I would like to invite you all to do a free trial. So at Darktrace, a lot of the claims that I have made today about AI, maybe you have some reservations. Maybe you've used AI in the past and found that it was too cumbersome to deploy. Again, there are different types of artificial intelligence out there. So please feel free to not to take my word for it. Ask for a proof of value. We'll be very, very happy to show you in any part of your business, be it email, be it cloud, or or SaaS, wherever you think is the most appropriate for you to start that journey. Of course, I would strongly suggest you start an email. But with that, I'm going to launch the last poll. Following today's session, would you be interested in, you can select one or more of choosing the Darktrace Proof of Value, which is a free 30-day trial of our AI directly in your environment, a further meeting to have more of a conversation about setting up that proof of value, or would you like some more information specific to your business or specific to the challenges that you're facing? Please vote now. 1 second. All right, with that musical interlude, thank you. I think let's close the quick poll and see what you've all voted for. I don't think are we showing the results on this one? I'm not sure. But Gennaro, I think we have some questions coming in, so I think we can open it up to the Q&A now.
Yeah, sure. I'm just expanding the chat window now. So first question that's come in, would you suggest a customer using or a business, sorry, using a lesser suite, so I'm guessing a lesser suite of Office 365 leverage Darktrace as the email protection engine, or should we still go for the advanced bundle with Office 365 with Darktrace? So I suppose where's the balance between the licensing plans that I spoke through against what Darktrace can add onto it? I think that's the premise of the question.
Yeah, I think so too. And I will have to caveat this to remind everyone that I work for Darktrace. So if you're going to spend money somewhere, I'm going to obviously suggest that you spend it on Darktrace. But jokes aside, it is a tricky one, Gennaro, because of course budgets are limited. What I will say this is that as you go up the Microsoft licensing, you have an increase in functionality and you have an increase in the capabilities that Microsoft gives you. However, it's more of the same technology approach. By complementing Darktrace, you're bringing a whole new different set of insights into your organization and a whole different set of capabilities. Remember that Microsoft, it's fantastic and it's got all of these different proactive policies, but I personally believe, again, the better together story. Rather than investing more into one path, that it is preferable to have some of both.
No, and I'd 100% agree with that. When we look at security in any kind of detail, it's always best to have it in layers, right? I mean, that doesn't just apply to the different domains of security, but within the same domain of security itself. But of course, within reason, I think all of us here who are, security specialists would love free security solutions in email, free on AV, and free on web. There is a practicality element for it. But yeah, I suppose it's having that balance of functionality and value is key. So awesome. So got a couple of other questions coming in. I'm going to try and consolidate some of these. So one of them is in reference to the trial and proof of concept in terms of the difficulty of setting it up. So things like deployment times and how it would be deployed.
Yeah, so for email, it's extraordinarily easy. I have to say 15 minutes just to allow for people to sort of log on, say hello, get a coffee, but it really is actually closer to 5. Essentially, once you've made the request to do a trial or to set up an environment, we'll spin up an instance and send you a journaling rule. And all you have to do is copy that journaling into your Microsoft email server and accept the API graph. And that's it.
Sounds easy enough to me. We definitely like easy. We definitely like quick. So no, that's really good. Couple of other questions now filtering through, which is good to see. How is this product licensed?
So the licensing is on a per use, again for email. Let me start there because it's where I'm more familiar. It's on a per user per month licensing, and cost-wise that will depend on the size of your business, but also of course if we're looking at just email or if we're looking also to add other cloud environments or SaaS environments, so other applications. So I would say that the best thing is to contact Tell Me More at Bytes and to have a conversation about how much coverage you are looking to have with Darktrace, and of course it will depend a little bit on also how extensive. Instead, when we're talking about cloud infrastructure, the VTAP, that's going to be licensed on a traffic volume. So that's a little bit different, and I'm going to stop there because that's really not my domain area. So again, Tell Me More at Bytes.
Perfect. And I think that kind of answered one of the other questions, which was, can you purchase Darktrace for email standalone outside of the networking solution? I'm guessing based on that answer, they're treated as individual, they're costed in a different way, but you don't have to have one to have the other. But I suppose just to extend that question myself, there's integration points between the various solutions?
Yeah, certainly. So the AI is the same core AI across all of the modules, and yeah, it is a bit like a Lego insofar that you can choose the building blocks of where and what areas of the business you want to give coverage or give Darktrace access and visibility to. And absolutely, email can be a standalone. It can be the first in your journey. I personally think that it's a very simple offering, not just because of the ease of integration and deployment, but also because it's more digestible, I think, to everyone to think about emails being analyzed by an AI or being somehow manipulated by the AI. It's not such a big and scary thing. When we launched Entagina for a network environment, for instance, we saw a lot of hesitancy around allowing an AI to take response. And then WannaCry and ransomware started becoming a thing, and then was like, well, you have to use AI because it simply isn't fast enough to rely on the humans. So we see many different types of also applications between the human team allowing, like for the AI to take response during the night or on the weekends. But with email, it has to be always on. We can't notify, right? Like the volume is so big that we wouldn't be able to keep up with it. So you absolutely just let the AI do what it needs to do.
Perfect. We've got one last question. I think it kind of ties into a bit of question one, but just for argument's sake, I'll throw this one into the mix. Is do you see yourself as a replacement for an email gateway solution, or are you just used as an extra layer?
So I actually see Microsoft as the replacement for email gateway solutions, because when I think of sort of like the history of how gateways were created, it was at a time where the idea was, if we can look at patterns en masse, and if we can look at emails en masse, then we can spot the threats as they emerge in more than one place and stop them from happening in other places. Well, Microsoft already does that. So definitely, because of again, it's a bit of a philosophical, apart from the technology point. With Antigena, there's no changes to our max record. There is no impact in the line. If there, excuse me, is a catastrophic failure with Antigena email, you'd still receive email. You're not cut off from the world. So I don't see them absolutely as competitive, because I just don't see them in the same category. While as instead, philosophically, the capabilities that Microsoft has introduced, I think, are a better replacement for the gateway and a better place for you to be dealing with emails en masse, as you yourself have said, Gennaro, of the mass amounts of spam and phish attacks, et cetera, that Microsoft already does a great job of stopping.
Absolutely, absolutely agree on those points. For me, it's always just having that layered approach, especially on the email side. Email is so important. It's still used vastly by attackers when it comes to attempting to compromise a business. So throwing extra security controls at the email level is absolutely sensible. It's always hard to make the jump and almost justification to just use one email filtration tool as opposed to tool working in tandem. But that's my opinion. Again, it all depends on the type of business, what they're getting hit with, and also what the budgets actually look like. But
yeah, certainly. But you did raise a good point, right? Like, email is still used widely by the attackers, and no surprise, because it is the lifeblood and the connective tissue of every organization. WhatsApp, you need to have WhatsApp to receive a WhatsApp. Same thing with iMessage or Kakao or any kind of messaging system. Email is also so, I think it has a special place in our hearts as well as hatred, because it is so pervasive. Everyone is, it is the technology on which business runs. So because it's the lifeblood of just about every company, I would also say that it has to be the priority of what you're securing.
No, absolutely. No business nowadays can live without emails, and well, they're just a pain in the neck most of the time. But we won't get into that. We'll be here forever. Of course, every single business needs email. We need to protect that email accordingly. Is long and the short answer. And when it comes to attackers, they know this. And as you say, it is the lifeblood of organizations. But also, when it comes to compromises due to email, it works. There's no easy way to say it, but it works. The reason why people are still using email as an attack vector is because it works. So we need to halt that and mitigate that as much as possible. Anyway, that's probably enough rambling from me. I know that we can go down this rabbit hole for at least another hour, but I think we're up on time. So just wanted to say, very big thanks for everyone joining today. Hope you found this session useful. As mentioned, there are trials that we can offer on the Darktrace side. If you do want to have a separate session, a one-to-one, just to kick some ideas and thoughts around, we are also more than happy to do that. Very big thanks to you, Mariana. Thank you so much for presenting today. It was very informative. And yeah, looks like we are finishing on time. So thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone.